All right, enough mumbling. Let's get right to mistake number one in financial aid, and then I will respond in kind with a college admissions mistake.
Okay. Well, my first financial aid related mistake is not completing all of the required forms of a particular school.
Good one.
So, as we all know and we've discussed, all of the schools take the FAFSA, which is one of the two main financial aid forms, and all 4,000 or so schools require or take the FAFSA. A subset of all the schools out there require what's called the CSS profile, which determines your institutional aid at that school. So a school that requires you to complete the CSS profile in order to be considered for financial aid at that school indicates that they have institutional aid to potentially award. And most importantly, the takeaway here is that if you are applying to a particular school, you must see what that school wants from you in terms of financial aid. Because if the other,
because you don't get to pick.
Because you don't
Right.
get to pick. And the other unintended consequence of you not doing it correctly, if you only do the FAFSA for a school, let's say, that requires both the CSS profile and the FAFSA, or could even require the FAFSA, the CSS profile, and additional institutional forms from that school. If you blow those off, for whatever reason, you could unintentionally be signaling to that school that they're not your number one pick, and you're not that interested necessarily in that school because you didn't pay attention to what the rules were for that school. So it's like, if that were your number one choice, you'd make sure every T was crossed and every I was dotted. Yeah. But if you fail to do so for a particular school, they may take that as an indication that you're not that interested in that school. And schools, if you recall, are deeply concerned with protecting their yield, meaning the students that they have said yes to, or who they're planning to say yes to, they really want some kind of certainty that that student is going to say yes back to them. If you're not completing all the required financial aid forms for that school, it is not going to give that impression.
All right. Good point. A lot of signals in the college planning world, especially with applying and demonstrating interest. Okay. College admissions mistake number one that I'm going to be highlighting. These aren't in any particular order. This is actually hard for me to do. I don't know about you, because there's so many mistakes that people commit in this process. And in the really extensive, intense production meeting that we had before we came on the air, we probably came up with 80 to 90 mistakes. Remember that?
It was a long morning, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my first mistake that has to do with college admissions is having a list that is too top heavy. And that stems from a few different things. Number one, which is one of your favorites, there's like my kid's got a 95 average, he's taken 7 AP classes and has a, let's say a 1350 on the SAT, but let's just apply for Harvard because you got to be in it to win it, dollar in a dream. Okay, fine. I don't begrudge anyone for doing that, but that is kind of dumb when you consider that Harvard, for example, rejects something like, they receive applications from, I think 2,500 or 3,000 of them have perfect verbal, and another 1,000 on top of that have perfect math SAT scores, and they only take like a few hundred kids, right? So they reject so many people with perfect scores, so many valedictorians, etc. Okay, I get that. But I think another cause of the top-heavy list is really there's the bigger picture here of not knowing the big picture, not knowing who you're competing against. So when you are figuring out your college list with your guidance counselor, assuming you do something like that, then what you typically look at in high school is a software program called Naviance, or in some cases SCORE. And the flaws with those softwares generally is that you're looking only at other kids from your high school, and you're only examining SAT or ACT scores, if you have them, and your GPAs. But the reality is you're not competing with that little sliver of competition. You're competing with kids all over the country, and they're not just looking at those two factors, your grades and scores. They're looking at your rigor, which gets overlooked a lot in, I guess, college planning when you're in high school, the importance of rigor. And there's another 20 or 25 factors that have to do with the types of things that admissions officers will consider. And some of those are so far out of your control and some are in your control. But for example, if you go to certain feeder high schools, FEEDER, feeder high schools, like Andover, Exeter, Choate, you name it, those types of places, Harvard, Westlake out in California, you have already a leg up on the admissions process. If you are a recruited athlete or a legacy or underrepresented minority or an international student or another sort of special category like that, you have a leg up on your competition, which means, logically speaking, if you're not one of those special categories and you're not at a feeder high school and you don't have these other sort of thumbs on the scale of college admissions, you don't have as good of a shot as you might think if you're like, oh, well, Navian says I'm right in that clump, the scattergram. So I think it's very easy to make a top-heavy list and an unrealistic, unstrategic list if you are just relying on the tools that your high school gives you. Financial aid mistake number 2, or questions or comments?
And the only other thing is just that there are so many straight A students out there. There's so much grade inflation that you just
everyone has an A.
You can't attach where you're going to be in the whole world from your GPA. Unfortunately, and that's why it's gone back and forth. That's why the scores, ACTs and SATs, are having more relevance again.
They're coming back.
There's no common denominator anymore.
Good morning to Dawn. Good morning to Maureen, Judge Maureen. I wonder if she is involved in any pardoning today. So not appropriate. I'm sorry.
Timely, though.
Timely yet inappropriate. Nai is here.
You mean the pardoning wasn't appropriate?
No, my comments.
Or are discussing it?
Well, first my comments, then you're piling on. Yes. There's a lot of inappropriateness to go around.
There is a whole lot of inappropriate, that's for sure.
All right, let's stick to the financial aid mistakes.
All right. Financial aid mistakes, including retirement assets on the FAFSA. Retirement assets should be no place on your FAFSA, period. While
Says
that
in the direction.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
But people
just include your non-retirement assets. And
no, don't include.
Well, just include your non-retirement assets is what I had said.
Okay. Well, there's the point is that there's all these directions that people. I mean, Pearl will do what, 400 families worth of financial aid applications or something. You did like 30 yesterday.
Yep.
So she understands this stuff, but if you're doing this on your own, there's so many landmines. That's a big one. Exactly,
because honestly, if we were just having a casual conversation, and I said, don't include your non-retirement assets, how much do you have? It would be very logical for you to include your primary residence, not your retirement asset. It is an asset. It's one of your main assets.
Is the question about your net
worth?
It isn't.
What?
Is the question about your net worth on the FAFSA?
I
think it is.
Right.
Yeah. And then it says, here's what's included and here's what's not.
Right. Now, and I'm including 2 mistakes, but you're not supposed to include your primary residence either, nor the equity from it, nor any part of it on your FAFSA. By contrast, though, and this is potentially where the confusion is created from, the CSS profile, which is going to be required by a subset of schools, about 400 or so, which is going to be submitted alongside the FAFSA. The same financial aid officer is going to be reading both. On the CSS profile, you are asked to include your primary residence, the equity you have on it, the debt you owe on it, your retirement assets are also supposed to be included. And I always get like this panic-stricken email from a client like, wait a minute, I thought the retirement doesn't count. It doesn't. However, on the CSS profile, they are still asking you about it. Well, hey, how's it in any of their business if it's not computed into the formula? Because they're the ones who are in charge, who hold the purse strings. Because you want money from that place and this is what they've asked for, that's why you have to provide it. But no, as a matter of record and experience, they do not use the retirement figures in any calculation to penalize you per se. But keep them off, keep your retirement assets and your primary residence off of the FAFSA.
All right, so if you're just joining us, we're talking about 5 deadly self-inflicted college planning mistakes, whether that be admissions or financial aid. Pearl's covering the financial aid mistakes. I'm covering the other mistakes. We had a hard time limiting this to 5. I think we're going to throw in some bonus mistakes, but mistake number 1 was basically not applying or not submitting the right forms. Pearl covered that for financial aid. Mistake number 2 was all about having a way too ambitious, top-heavy list, not enough safety schools, mostly based on an unrealistic view or understanding of who you're competing with. I think that's the number 1 cause. And the third mistake that Pearl just mentioned was oversharing or over-including things that should not be included when you're listing your assets on the FAFSA, which is the main financial aid application. I'm going to go right into number 4. Number 4 biggest mistake. Watching us. No, I'm kidding. I don't mean to put you down. Okay. Mistake number 4 is about essays. So there's a few sub mistakes that I wanted to cover here. So I'm slipping in extra bonuses right here. So one of the biggest mistakes when you're writing a college essay is understanding what or failure to understand what the admissions officer is really looking for, which is some sort of personal insight. Colleges, for the most part, do not conduct one-on-one admissions interviews anymore because they're inundated with applications because of these test optional policies and the growth of the college, the common application in the college admissions process. So what they're looking for in lieu of an interview is some sort of gauge or sense of what the student is really like, character, values, how they perceive things, some sort of change or growth or progression or before and after, something like that. The biggest cause of kids not being personal enough in the personal statement, number 1, is probably because they've never done this before. This type of writing is not typically what's done in high school. So therefore, this is one of the big reasons why your English teacher, who may be running like a summer boot camp or something, is not necessarily the best person to really guide you as to writing something, because they have no idea what goes on in that room where it happens, so to speak, in terms of the admissions committee when they meet and what they're looking for. So that's one of the biggest reasons. I'd say another cause of that is, let's face it, a lot of kids are using ChatGPT now, and that is fine. I'm not against ChatGPT at all, but when you use it as your first and that becomes your final draft of something, I think that's where you run into trouble and you come up with all this sort of superficial, highfalutin generalizations, and you're not showing any of that before and after. Before I was this, then this thing happened, and then from there that changed me, and this is how I see things now, that type of thing. But it's okay to use ChatGPT, particularly if maybe you do your own draft first or you do your own outline first and you get across some of these concepts, and then maybe use it to edit, and then from there you go in and edit also. So it can be used as like the equivalent of a calculator to sort of help you along, but not to create the actual essay. The last 2 things I want to say are sort of closely related is waiting until the last minute, not doing them over the summer, but also discovering a surprise, quote unquote, surprise essay at the last minute. So first of all, every kid that has ever worked with us, with Lockwood College Prep, either one-on-one or through our summer boot camps, the goal is to get everything done over the summer so that you are done and they're out the door before school starts up again in the fall. Because the fall of senior year is pretty rough, academically speaking, as well as socially and extracurricularly. So you want to get all these things done over the summer. That's one of the best tips that I think we collectively could ever give a student. But the second thing is that sometimes those essays are quote unquote hidden from you on the common application, because you can log into a common application, load your college there, and then you'll see right on the home screen, supplemental essays, : this college does not require additional essays. And then you might breathe a sigh of relief thinking, okay, that means I have to write only 18 essays, not 22. But if you delve further into the application at some point, you might come across a section called questions, which asks several questions, some of which are in 300 words or less. Why are you interested in applying here? that's a supplemental essay, even though on the dashboard of that college in the common application it said there's no essay. So that's a big deal. And the other surprise essay scenario that I've seen is when a kid is applying for a special program, like a music program or something else, and they have everything done. They've gone through the application. They're ready to submit. And then they see, oh, by the way, because you're applying to a special program or an honors college or something like that, here are 3 other essays that you've got to submit by tomorrow. So that's another argument for doing all this stuff over the summer, long before your deadlines. And essays, frankly, they need some room to breathe, in between drafts. So those are my essay mistakes. I hope you find those helpful. Let us know if you have any questions about this stuff. And now we're going to switch to financial aid mistake. I guess it's your 3rd one and the 4th overall mistake.
Yeah.